When I pulled up to my daughter's house that rainy Saturday afternoon, I never imagined I'd find my granddaughter locked in a cold garage, forbidden from entering her own home. What I discovered inside that house made my blood run cold. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade, and the 6 words I spoke that day changed everything forever. But the real shock came when I decided exactly what I would give them in return for throwing me out of their lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain hammered against my windshield as I drove south on Highway 43, following the curves of the Willamette River toward Lake Oswego. My old Honda sedan needed new wiper blades. The rubber scraped against the glass with every pass, leaving streaks that made the gray November afternoon even harder to navigate. Eleanor would have reminded me to replace them weeks ago, but Eleanor had been gone for 8 months now, and I was still learning to remember the small things on my own. My phone sat in the cup holder, the screen dark but somehow menacing. The last text from Rebecca still burned in my memory. "Dad, we need to talk. It's about Sophie. Can you come by tomorrow around 2?" That was all she'd written. No context, no explanation. Just that ominous invitation that felt more like a summons. I'd tried calling 3 times that morning. Each call went straight to voicemail. Rebecca always answered my calls. Always. Even when she was busy with her real estate clients, she'd at least send a quick text saying she'd call back later. The silence felt wrong, like static before a storm. Traffic crawled through downtown Riverside, past the post office where I'd worked for 33 years. My route had covered this same stretch of road, rain or shine, delivering mail to families I'd watched grow and change over decades. Retirement had given me freedom, but it had also left me with too much empty time to think. Too much time to notice the small cracks forming in my daughter's perfect life. Marcus had caught me checking my mailbox that morning. My neighbor was one of those people who could read worry on a face like other people read newspapers. He'd set down his rake and walked across his lawn to my driveway, leaves sticking to his boots. "Something eating at you, Hal?" he'd asked, his weathered face creased with concern. "Rebecca wants to talk about Sophie." I'd admitted, unable to shake the unease in my gut. Marcus had nodded slowly. He'd known my family since Rebecca was in high school, back when Eleanor was still healthy and our lives felt simple and manageable. "That son-in-law of yours still hitting you up for money?" The question had landed like a punch. Derek had asked me for loans 3 times in the past year. $5,000 for a business opportunity in March. $8,000 for an investment property in June. $12,000 just last month for what he'd called a guaranteed return venture. Each time, I'd said no. Each time, Rebecca had grown a little colder toward me. I told Marcus the truth. "I think that's what this is about." Now, driving through the rain toward their pristine neighborhood, I replayed every conversation I'd had with Derek over the past 18 months. The man had charm in abundance, the kind that made people overlook the carefully constructed facade. He sold commercial real estate and drove a leased BMW he couldn't actually afford. He wore expensive suits and talked constantly about deals that were always just about to close, opportunities that never quite materialized the way he promised. Rebecca had been dazzled by him when they met 5 years ago. She was a single mother rebuilding her life after her first husband abandoned her and Sophie. Derek had seemed like stability, like success, like everything she deserved after years of struggle. Eleanor and I had kept our doubts to ourselves, hoping we were wrong about the warning signs we noticed. The neighborhoods changed as I drove deeper into Lake Oswego. Modest homes gave way to larger properties with manicured lawns and 2-car garages. Rebecca and Derek's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a 2-story Craftsman with pale blue siding and white trim. Derek's BMW was parked in the driveway next to Rebecca's newer Lexus SUV. Both vehicles probably cost more than my entire year's pension. I pulled up behind the BMW and killed the engine. Through the rain-blurred windshield, I could see lights on in the front windows. Everything looked normal. Peaceful. The kind of house that belonged in a magazine spread about successful suburban families. Then I noticed the garage door. It was closed, but I could see a faint light coming from the small window near the top. Strange. Derek usually kept his expensive home gym equipment on full display, the garage door open whenever he worked out so neighbors could see his $1,000 rowing machine and his collection of weights. I grabbed my jacket and stepped out into the rain. Cold droplets immediately soaked through my shirt collar. I should have worn something heavier, but I'd been distracted when I left the house. The driveway was slick with wet leaves, and I had to watch my footing as I approached the front door. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint I almost missed it beneath the drumming rain. Someone was crying. The sound was coming from the garage. My hand froze halfway to the doorbell. I stood there in the rain, water running down my face, listening. The crying came in quiet, controlled sobs, like someone trying desperately not to be heard. It was a young voice. Sophie's voice. I moved away from the front door and walked quickly to the side of the garage where a regular entry door provided access from outside. My heart hammered in my chest as I tried the handle. Locked. I pressed my face close to the small window set high in the door and peered inside. Sophie sat on the concrete floor in the corner, hugging her knees to her chest. She wore only a thin hoodie and jeans, no coat despite the cold. Her blonde hair hung limply around her face, and even through the rain-streaked glass, I could see she was shivering. The garage was unheated, barely warmer than the raw November air outside. But what made my stomach drop was the rest of the garage. Derek's expensive gym equipment filled nearly every inch of space. The rowing machine, the weight rack, the treadmill, the bench press. Everything gleaming and perfect while my granddaughter sat shivering on the floor like a piece of discarded furniture. I rapped hard on the window. Sophie's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. When she recognized me, relief and panic crossed her face in equal measure. She scrambled to her feet and rushed to the door, pressing her hands against the glass from the inside. "Grandpa," she mouthed through the window, shaking her head frantically. "You have to go. Please." I pulled out my phone and held it up. "Are you locked in?" I mouthed back. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He locked me in." She pointed toward the main house. "They're inside." "How long?" She held up fingers. 6 hours. 6 hours. My 16-year-old granddaughter had been locked in a cold garage for 6 hours on a Saturday afternoon. While inside that warm, expensive house, her mother and stepfather were doing what? Enjoying their afternoon? Having the conversation they wanted to have with me without Sophie present? I looked at Sophie's face through that window, saw the fear and shame and desperate hope in her eyes, and something cold and hard crystallized in my chest. Eleanor had always been the diplomatic one, the one who believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt and working through problems with patience and understanding. But Eleanor wasn't here, and I was looking at my granddaughter trapped like an animal in a cage. I pulled out my phone and texted Rebecca. "I'm here. Let Sophie out of the garage right now." Through the window, I could see Sophie's phone light up in her pocket. "They took it," she called out, her voice muffled through the door. "They took my phone this morning." I sent another text. "Open the garage door in the next 60 seconds or I'm calling the police." My phone rang immediately. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. I answered without speaking. "Dad, please don't make a scene." Her voice was tight with forced calm. "This is a family matter. We're handling Sophie's behavior issues, and we'll explain everything when you come inside." "Behavior issues?" My voice came out flat and dangerous. "You locked your daughter in an unheated garage for 6 hours and you're calling it behavior issues?" She needed time to think about her choices. That was Derek's voice in the background, close enough to Rebecca's phone that he must have been standing right next to her. "We're her parents. This is our decision." I looked at Sophie through the window, watched her wrap her arms tighter around herself against the cold. "You have 30 seconds to open this door, Rebecca. After that, I make calls you won't like." The line went dead. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard the mechanical whir of the automatic garage door beginning to rise. Sophie stepped back as gray daylight flooded into the garage. The door rose slowly, revealing the expensive cars in the driveway, the perfect suburban street beyond, and finally, standing in the doorway between the garage and the house, Derek and Rebecca. Derek stood with his arms crossed, dressed in dark slacks and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Rebecca stood slightly behind him, her face pale but set with determination. They looked like they were posing for a family portrait, all surface perfection with rot underneath. I stepped into the garage and went straight to Sophie, wrapping my jacket around her shoulders. She was ice cold, her whole body trembling. "How could you?" I asked, looking from my daughter to her husband. "How could you do this to your own child? She vandalized property." Derek's voice was calm, reasonable, the tone of a man who'd rehearsed his justification. "She spray-painted obscenities on the side of my business partner's building. Do you have any idea how much damage she caused? How much embarrassment?" I looked at Sophie. Her face told me everything I needed to know. Whatever had happened, there was more to the story than Derek was saying. Rebecca finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Dad, you don't understand the whole situation. Sophie has been acting out for months. Skipping school, talking back, refusing to follow rules. We've tried everything else." "Everything else?" I kept my arm around Sophie's shoulders. "Everything except treating her like a human being instead of an inconvenience?" "That's not fair," Rebecca said, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Derek took a step forward, his reasonable mask beginning to slip. "Harold, I appreciate that you care about Sophie. But this is our household, and we decide how to discipline our children. Now, we called you here to discuss something important, so if you'd like to come inside and talk like adults, we can do that. Otherwise, you can leave." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The woman standing before me bore little resemblance to the strong, independent person Eleanor and I had raised. Something had changed in her since she'd married Derek. Something had dimmed. "We're not having any conversation," I said quietly, "until Sophie is warm and safe. Then you're going to tell me exactly what's been going on in this house. And after that, we're going to talk about all those loans you've been asking me for, Derek, and why a man who lives in a house like this and drives a car like that keeps needing money from his retired father-in-law." Derek's face flushed red. "That's none of your business. It became my business when you locked my granddaughter in a garage." I turned to Sophie. "Get whatever you need from your room. You're coming home with me." The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Rebecca's face went white. Derek's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. And Sophie looked up at me with an expression of such hope and terror that it nearly broke my heart. "Dad," Rebecca finally said, her voice shaking. "You can't just take her. Watch me." Sophie ran upstairs while Derek blocked my path to the house. His reasonable businessman facade had cracked completely, revealing something uglier underneath. "You think you can just waltz in here and undermine my authority?" He stepped closer, using his height advantage to intimidate. "This is my home. My family. My rules." I held my ground. "Your rules include locking children in garages? What else are your rules, Derek? What else have you been doing to that girl?" Rebecca appeared behind him, her hand on his arm. "Derek, please. Let's all just calm down and talk about this rationally." "Rationally?" I looked at my daughter with disbelief. "There's nothing rational about what I walked into today. How long has this been going on?" She looked away, unable or unwilling to answer. Derek filled the silence instead. "Sophie has been testing boundaries for months. She needs structure. Discipline. Things her biological father never provided and that you apparently don't understand. I know the difference between discipline and cruelty. I kept my voice level, though rage simmered just beneath the surface. I raised a daughter who turned out just fine until she married a man who thinks locking people in garages is acceptable parenting. Derek's face flushed crimson. Get out of my house. I'm leaving. With Sophie. Over my dead body. Derek moved to block the stairway leading up to Sophie's room. You have no legal right to take her anywhere. She's a minor, and we're her legal guardians. Then call the police. I pulled out my phone. Let's see what they think about your parenting methods. Rebecca finally found her voice, stepping between us. Dad, please. Don't do this. Don't tear our family apart over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Sophie was locked in that garage for 6 hours on a November afternoon. What exactly am I misunderstanding? She was being punished. Rebecca's voice rose defensively. She destroyed property. She embarrassed us in front of Derek's business associates. She needed to understand there are consequences for her actions. So you chose consequences that could have given her hypothermia? That's your parenting strategy? The question hung in the air like smoke. I watched my daughter struggle with an answer, saw the conflict playing out behind her eyes. Part of her knew this was wrong. I could see it in the way she couldn't quite meet my gaze, in the way her hands twisted together nervously. But she'd invested too much in this marriage, this life, this image of suburban success to admit the truth. Derek's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. I'm going to explain this once, old man. Sophie has been out of control. She vandalizes property. She lies. She steals money from Rebecca's purse. She's been suspended from school twice this semester. We have tried talking. We've tried therapy. We've tried everything your generation would call appropriate, and nothing has worked. So yes, we've had to get creative with consequences. Creative. The word tasted bitter. What other creative consequences have you used? That's none of your concern. Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs, a backpack slung over one shoulder and my jacket still wrapped around her. Her face was pale but determined. I'm ready, Grandpa. Derek moved fast, blocking the bottom of the stairs with his body. You're not going anywhere. I stepped forward, close enough that Derek had to look down to meet my eyes. Move. Now. Or what? You'll hit me? Go ahead. Give me a reason to have you arrested for assault. I won't need to touch you. I held up my phone where the voice recording app was clearly running. I've been recording this entire conversation. Every word about locking Sophie in the garage. Every justification. Every threat. So you can let her walk down those stairs peacefully, or I can send this recording to the police, to Child Protective Services, and to every one of your business associates. Your choice. Derek's confidence faltered. You're bluffing. Try me. The standoff lasted maybe 10 seconds, though it felt like hours. Finally, Derek stepped aside with barely controlled fury. This isn't over, Harold. Not by a long shot. Sophie hurried down the stairs, moving carefully around Derek like he was a snake that might strike. I put my arm around her shoulders and guided her toward the door leading back to the garage and my car beyond. Rebecca's voice stopped us. Sophie, please. Don't do this to us. We love you. We're only trying to help you become a better person. Sophie turned back, and I felt her trembling under my arm. If you love me, Mom, you wouldn't let him treat me like this. Those words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Her face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. But she didn't argue. Didn't defend Sophie or challenge Derek. Just stood there crying while her daughter walked out. We made it to my car in silence. I helped Sophie into the passenger seat and threw her backpack in the back. My hands shook as I started the engine, adrenaline and anger making my movements jerky and uncertain. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I could see Derek and Rebecca standing in the garage doorway, watching us leave. Sophie didn't speak until we were back on Highway 43, heading north toward Riverside. She stared out the window at the gray river flowing past, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "Thank you for coming," she finally whispered. "I didn't think anyone would." The words cut deep. "How long has this been happening, Sophie?" "The garage, I mean." "The punishment." She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. Then the words started spilling out like water from a broken dam. "It started small last year. He'd make me stand in the corner for an hour if I forgot to do my chores. Then it got worse. If I talked back or got a bad grade, he'd take away my phone and computer for weeks at a time. Lock them in his office where I couldn't get them." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, processing this information. "What about the vandalism Derek mentioned?" Sophie's laugh was bitter and broken. "I didn't vandalize anything. His business partner made a pass at me at their company party last month. Grabbed my arm and said things no adult should say to a 16-year-old. I pulled away and told him to leave me alone. He got loud and made a scene, saying I was being disrespectful. Derek took his side. Said I must have led him on somehow." My hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles went white. "What happened after that?" Derek said I was grounded indefinitely. No phone, no friends, no art supplies. He said I needed to think about how my behavior affects his reputation. When I tried to explain what really happened, he called me a liar. Mom just stood there and let him. And today? The garage? This morning I tried to leave the house to go to my friend Madison's place. Derek caught me climbing out my bedroom window. He said if I wanted to act like a criminal, he'd treat me like one. He dragged me down to the garage and locked me in there at 8 this morning. Said I could come out when I was ready to apologize for lying and causing trouble. 8 in the morning. 9 hours, not 6. My granddaughter had spent 9 hours locked in a cold garage, and when I'd confronted them, they'd lied about the timeline. I felt sick. "Has he ever hit you?" Sophie shook her head. "He's too smart for that. He knows bruises show. But there are other ways to hurt someone. He controls everything. What I eat, when I sleep, who I can talk to. Mom gave him access to track my location on my phone. He reads all my texts. He went through my sketchbooks last week and threw away half my drawings because he said they were disturbing." "What kind of drawings?" "Just sad faces. Dark colors. He said they proved I was mentally unstable and that I needed to focus on more positive art." She pulled my jacket tighter around herself. "Grandpa, I can't go back there. I know he's going to be so angry about today. Mom won't protect me. She never does." We drove in silence for a while, my mind racing through options and consequences. Eleanor would have known exactly what to do. She had a gift for navigating complicated family situations with grace and wisdom. But Eleanor was gone, and I was making decisions alone in territory I didn't fully understand. "You'll stay with me tonight," I said finally. "Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. But Sophie, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything else? Anything worse than what you've told me?" She was quiet again, and I could see her internal struggle. Finally, she spoke in a voice so small I almost couldn't hear it over the rain. "He controls Mom's money too. She had her own real estate business before they got married. Now he manages all their finances. She has to ask him for money to buy groceries. He says it's because she's bad with budgets, but I think he just wants to control her." The pieces were clicking together now, forming a picture I should have seen years ago. Derek's constant requests for loans. His expensive lifestyle despite supposedly successful business ventures. Rebecca's gradual withdrawal from family gatherings and her increasing defensiveness about her marriage. Sophie's growing quietness over the past 2 years. "Has your mom tried to leave him?" Sophie nodded. "Last year, after he made me sleep on the floor of my room for a week because I got a C on a math test. She packed bags for both of us while he was at work. But when he came home and saw what she was doing, he showed her something on his computer. I don't know what it was, but she unpacked everything and never tried again. Now she just goes along with whatever he says. Financial records, I thought. Derek probably had evidence of spending or debts that he was holding over Rebecca's head. The control went deeper than I'd imagined. We pulled into my driveway as the afternoon light was fading. Marcus was still in his yard, now raking wet leaves into piles. He looked up as we parked, read something in my face, and gave a small nod. Whatever had happened, he understood it wasn't good. Inside my house, Sophie seemed to relax slightly. The familiar space, unchanged since her last visit months ago, offered a kind of safety that her own home hadn't provided in years. She sat at the kitchen table while I made hot chocolate, her hands wrapped around the warm mug like it was a lifeline. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. "Dad, please bring Sophie home. We can work this out. Derek has apologized for overreacting. We love her. We want what's best for her." I stared at the message, seeing the careful language, the manipulation disguised as reconciliation. I typed back a single sentence. "Sophie stays here until we figure out what's actually best for her, not what's convenient for Derek." The response came immediately. "You're making a huge mistake. You don't understand the full situation. Then come over tomorrow and explain it to me. Without Derek." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "I can't do that. Derek needs to be part of the conversation." That told me everything I needed to know. Rebecca was either too afraid or too controlled to have a conversation with her own father without her husband present. Sophie had fallen asleep on my couch by 7, exhausted from the day's trauma. I covered her with the quilt Eleanor had made years ago and sat in my chair by the window, watching the rain and thinking about next steps. The recording on my phone was evidence, but would it be enough? What were my actual legal options for protecting Sophie? My phone rang around 8. An unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Mr. Mitchell? This is Patricia Chen. I'm a police officer with Lake Oswego PD. Your daughter and son-in-law filed a report claiming you removed their minor child from their home without permission. I need to ask you a few questions." My heart rate kicked up, but I kept my voice steady. "Officer Chen, my granddaughter was locked in an unheated garage for 9 hours as punishment. I have her here with me now, and she's safe. I also have a recording of her parents admitting to this treatment." There was a pause on the line. I could hear papers rustling. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to understand the seriousness of the situation. Taking a minor without parental consent, regardless of your relationship, can be considered custodial interference. However, given what you're telling me, I think it's best if I come by to speak with everyone involved. Are you at your residence in Riverside?" "Yes, on Maple Street. Sophie is sleeping right now. She was exhausted and cold when I brought her home. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Please don't leave the property, and don't let Sophie leave either. We need to sort this out properly." The call ended, and I sat back in my chair, watching Sophie sleep. Her face looked younger in rest, vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. How had things deteriorated so badly without me noticing? Had I been so wrapped up in my own grief over Eleanor that I'd missed the signs of my granddaughter's suffering? Officer Chen arrived exactly 20 minutes later. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes that didn't match the stern set of her jaw. I invited her in quietly, gesturing toward the living room so we wouldn't wake Sophie. We sat across from each other, and she pulled out a notebook. "Start from the beginning, Mr. Mitchell. Tell me everything that happened today." I walked her through it all. The text from Rebecca. The drive to Lake Oswego. Finding Sophie locked in the garage. The confrontation with Derek and my daughter. I played her the recording on my phone, watching her face as she listened to Derek's justifications and threats. When the recording ended, Officer Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Mitchell, what you've described constitutes child endangerment at minimum. However, the situation is complicated by the custody issue. You removed a minor from her legal guardians without their permission. They were abusing her. I understand that's your belief, and the recording supports concerns about their judgment. But legally, you should have called us first rather than taking matters into your own hands. She looked at Sophie sleeping on the couch. That said, I'm not going to remove her from your care tonight. She's clearly safe here, and moving her again would be traumatic. What happens next? I'll need to speak with Sophie when she wakes up. Get her statement about what's been happening. Then I'll need to visit your daughter and son-in-law. Child Protective Services will be involved. There will be an investigation. She met my eyes directly. Mr. Mitchell, I need you to be prepared for the possibility that Sophie may be returned to her parents' custody while the investigation proceeds, unless we find evidence of immediate danger. She was locked in a garage for 9 hours. How is that not immediate danger? I agree with you. But I'm telling you how the system works. Parents have significant rights, even when they've made poor choices. Unless we can prove ongoing abuse or immediate threat, a judge may order Sophie returned home while the case is investigated. The frustration must have shown on my face because Officer Chen's expression softened. I have kids of my own, Mr. Mitchell. If someone locked one of them in a garage all day, I'd want to tear the world apart too. But you need to work within the system now. Let me do my job. Let CPS do theirs. Build a proper case instead of acting on emotion, no matter how justified that emotion might be. Sophie stirred on the couch, her eyes fluttering open. She sat up slowly, disoriented, then focused on Officer Chen's uniform. Panic flooded her face. No. Please. I'm not going back there. Officer Chen moved to sit on the coffee table across from Sophie, keeping her body language open and non-threatening. Hi Sophie. I'm Officer Chen. Your grandfather called me because he's concerned about you. I'm not here to take you anywhere tonight. I just need to ask you some questions. Is that okay? Sophie looked at me, fear and uncertainty written across her features. I nodded encouragement. Tell her the truth, sweetheart. Everything you told me. Over the next hour, Sophie recounted her experiences living with Derek and Rebecca. Officer Chen took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Sophie's voice shook as she described the escalating punishments, the isolation, the control. She showed Officer Chen text messages on her recovered phone that Derek had sent, berating her for minor infractions. She described the incident with Derek's business partner and how she'd been blamed for his inappropriate behavior. Officer Chen's face remained professionally neutral, but I saw her grip tighten on her pen more than once. When Sophie finished, the officer closed her notebook and looked at her directly. Sophie, you've been very brave telling me all this. I want you to know that none of what happened to you was your fault. Adults are supposed to protect children, not punish them for things beyond their control. Tears streamed down Sophie's face. Are you going to make me go back? Not tonight. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're safe. But I need you to understand that this process takes time. There will be interviews, investigations, possibly court hearings. It's not going to be easy. I don't care. Anything is better than going back there. After Officer Chen left to visit Derek and Rebecca, I made soup for dinner. Sophie picked at it listlessly, exhaustion and stress killing her appetite. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with words. My phone rang around 9. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. I answered on speaker so Sophie could hear. Dad, the police just left. Rebecca's voice was tight with barely controlled hysteria. They're opening an investigation. Derek is furious. He says this is all your fault. That you poisoned Sophie against us and made her lie to the authorities. Sophie didn't lie. She told the truth about being locked in a garage for 9 hours. About being punished for things that weren't her fault. About being controlled and isolated. You don't understand. Derek has been under so much stress with work. His business partner pulled out of their deal and he's facing financial problems. He's not thinking clearly. But he loves Sophie. We both do. Love doesn't lock people in garages, Rebecca. She was silent for a moment, When she spoke again, her voice was small and broken. "What do you want from us, Dad?" "I want you to remember who you used to be. Before Derek. Before this life you've built on appearances and control. I want you to be the mother Sophie deserves instead of the woman Derek turned you into. That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair? Your daughter spent today locked in a cold garage. You stood by and let it happen. You called the police on your own father for protecting her. So no, Rebecca, I don't care about what's fair to you right now." Derek's voice came through the phone, angry and aggressive. "Listen here, you self-righteous old fool. You've destroyed my family with your interference. I will sue you for everything you have. I will make sure you never see Sophie again. I will ruin you." I kept my voice level. "Derek, I have a recording of you admitting to locking Sophie in the garage. I have her testimony about years of abuse. I have Officer Chen's report. You can threaten me all you want, but the truth is already out there. You can't control this situation the way you've controlled everything else." The line went dead. Sophie was crying quietly, and I moved to sit beside her on the couch. "I'm sorry you had to hear that." She leaned against my shoulder. "I'm glad you're not backing down. Mom needs someone to stand up to him. She can't do it herself anymore." That night, I lay awake in my bedroom while Sophie slept in the guest room down the hall. Eleanor's side of the bed was cold and empty, and I found myself talking to her the way I sometimes did in the dark hours. "I hope I'm doing the right thing, Elle. I hope I'm not making everything worse." The next morning, Marcus came by with coffee and pastries from the bakery downtown. He took one look at my face and knew I hadn't slept. "Heard police cars on your street last night. Everything okay?" I filled him in on the situation while Sophie showered and changed into some of Eleanor's old clothes that I'd kept. They were too big on her thin frame, but at least they were clean and warm. Marcus listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing more troubled as the story unfolded. "That son of a bitch," he finally said. "Pardon my language, but that's what he is. What can I do to help? Just being here helps. Sophie needs to see that there are still good people in the world." Sophie emerged from the guest room looking slightly better. The hot shower and clean clothes had brought some color back to her face. She ate breakfast quietly while Marcus told her stories about the neighborhood, carefully avoiding any mention of her situation. Around 10, my doorbell rang. A woman in a gray pantsuit stood on my porch, a leather folder under her arm. "Mr. Mitchell?" "I'm Linda Brennan from Child Protective Services. Officer Chen referred this case to us. I need to speak with Sophie Torres." My stomach dropped, but I'd known this was coming. I let her in and called Sophie to the living room. Mrs. Brennan was professional but warm, explaining the process and what would happen next. She interviewed Sophie alone in the dining room for over an hour while Marcus and I waited in the kitchen, both of us silent with tension. When they emerged, Mrs. Brennan pulled me aside. "Mr. Mitchell, based on my initial assessment and Officer Chen's report, I'm recommending that Sophie remain in your care temporarily. There will be an emergency custody hearing within 72 hours. Both parents will be present. You'll need a lawyer." "I don't have a lawyer." "Then get one. Today. Because Derek and Rebecca Torres have already retained counsel, and they're going to fight this hard." She handed me a card. "This is a family law attorney I've worked with before. She's good, and she understands cases like this." After Mrs. Brennan left, I called the number on the card. Jennifer Martinez answered on the second ring, and when I explained the situation, she agreed to meet with me that afternoon. The consultation fee was more than I wanted to spend, but Sophie's safety was worth any cost. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, drawing in a sketchbook Marcus had brought over. Her pencil moved across the page in quick, sure strokes, creating images I couldn't quite see from my angle. She looked up when I ended the call with the lawyer. "Are they going to make me go back, Grandpa?" "Not if I can help it. But sweetheart, you need to be prepared. This is going to get ugly. Derek and your mother are going to say things about me, about you. They're going to try to make you look like a troubled kid who's lying for attention. Let them try. Sophie's voice was stronger than I'd heard it in months. I have text messages. I have diary entries. I have my friend Madison who will testify about the things Derek said and did. I'm not scared of them anymore. Looking at her face, seeing the determination there, I felt a surge of pride. This was the granddaughter I remembered from before Derek entered their lives. Strong. Brave. Unbroken despite everything they'd tried to do to her spirit. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Derek Torres. I'm giving you one last chance to return Sophie before this goes too far. If you force us into court, I will destroy your reputation. I have evidence that you're an unfit guardian. I have witnesses who will testify to your instability since your wife's death. Bring Sophie home by 5 p.m. today or face the consequences. I showed the text to Marcus, who read it and shook his head. He's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. I texted back a single word. No. The response came immediately. You'll regret this. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 9. Jennifer Martinez met with me Monday afternoon at her office in downtown Portland, a modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. She was sharp and direct, the kind of person who didn't waste time on pleasantries when there was work to be done. She reviewed the recording I'd made, read through Sophie's text messages, and examined the timeline of events. Her expression grew darker as she absorbed the details. Mr. Mitchell, this is a strong case for temporary custody. The garage incident alone is damning. But I need to prepare you for what Derek's attorney will argue. I'm listening. They'll claim Sophie is a troubled teenager who manipulates situations to get her way. They'll paint you as a grieving widower who's latched onto saving his granddaughter as a way to deal with your own loss. They'll argue that you acted rashly, removing Sophie without proper legal channels, and that your judgment is compromised by emotion. Is my judgment compromised? Jennifer looked at me directly. Honestly? You should have called the police first instead of taking Sophie yourself. But given what you witnessed, I understand why you acted the way you did. The question is whether a judge will see it the same way. What are our chances? She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled in thought. 60-40 in our favor for temporary custody. The evidence of endangerment is clear. But permanent custody will be much harder. Derek has resources. He'll hire experts. He'll present character witnesses. He'll fight this with everything he has because losing custody means admitting to abuse, and men like him never admit they're wrong. I can't let Sophie go back to that house. Then we need to be strategic. We need more than just the garage incident. We need a pattern. Sophie mentioned other punishments. We need documentation. Witnesses. Medical records if she ever went to the doctor for injuries. Sophie appeared in the doorway of Jennifer's office. Her friend Madison was with her, a tall girl with purple-streaked hair and fierce eyes. I texted Madison last night. She wants to help. Jennifer gestured for them to sit. Madison, I need you to tell me everything you know about Sophie's home life. Don't exaggerate. Don't guess. Just facts you personally witnessed or that Sophie told you at the time they happened. Madison pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. I started keeping records 6 months ago when things got really bad. She scrolled through entries. July 15th, Sophie showed up at my house with bruises on her wrists. She said Derek had grabbed her and dragged her to her room for talking during dinner. August 2nd, Sophie hadn't eaten in 2 days because Derek put a lock on the refrigerator and said she needed to earn the privilege of meals by getting straight A's. Jennifer typed rapidly on her laptop, recording everything. Keep going. September 23rd, Sophie called me crying at 2 in the morning. Derek had taken her bedroom door off the hinges because she'd closed it during an argument. He said privacy was a privilege, not a right. October 7th, I went to their house to pick Sophie up for a school project. Derek made her stand in the corner of the living room the entire time I was there because she'd forgotten to do the dishes that morning. The list went on. Each entry was dated, detailed, specific. Jennifer's expression grew more serious with each revelation. "Madison, would you be willing to testify to all of this in court?" "Absolutely." Madison's voice was firm. "Someone needs to stop him. Sophie's mom won't do it, so someone else has to." After they left, Jennifer and I discussed strategy. She explained the process, the timeline, the likely arguments from both sides. The consultation lasted 2 hours and cost me $400 I didn't really have, but it was necessary. That evening, Sophie and I sat on my back porch watching the sun set through the rain clouds. The air was cold and damp, but she seemed to crave the openness after so many hours locked in enclosed spaces. "Are you scared about tomorrow?" she asked. "Terrified. But I'm more scared of what happens if we don't fight." She nodded, understanding. "Grandpa, what if the judge doesn't believe me? What if they think I'm just a messed up kid making things up? Then we appeal. We keep fighting. We don't give up. Derek has money for good lawyers. He has important friends. What do we have? The truth. And sometimes that's enough." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "Grandma would have known exactly what to do. She was always so good at fixing things. Your grandmother would have done exactly what I'm doing. She would have stood between you and anyone trying to hurt you, no matter the cost." We sat in silence as darkness fell, both of us thinking about Eleanor and wishing she was there to guide us through this mess. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and wet earth. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Normal sounds from a normal evening, except nothing about our situation was normal anymore. Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray. I dressed in the only suit I owned, a navy blue one I'd bought for Eleanor's funeral and hadn't worn since. Sophie wore a simple dress that had belonged to her grandmother, navy with small white flowers. We looked respectable, but I knew Derek and Rebecca would look better. They always did. Jennifer met us at the courthouse steps. She carried a leather briefcase stuffed with documents and wore an expression of focused determination. "Remember, let me do the talking unless the judge asks you a direct question. Don't let Derek's attorney provoke you. Stay calm no matter what they say." Inside, the courthouse smelled like floor polish and old paper. Our footsteps echoed on marble floors as we made our way to family court on the 3rd floor. Derek and Rebecca were already there, seated on a bench outside the courtroom with their attorney, a man in an expensive charcoal suit who radiated aggressive confidence. Derek looked composed and professional in a tailored suit, his expression one of wounded dignity. Rebecca sat beside him looking small and pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she saw Sophie, something flickered across her face. Longing, maybe, or regret. But she didn't stand up. Didn't call out. Just sat there beside her husband like a prisoner awaiting sentence. Derek's attorney approached Jennifer with a folder. "Discovery materials. We'll be presenting testimony from Dr. Raymond Foster, a child psychologist who's evaluated Sophie's behavioral patterns. We're also calling witnesses who can speak to Mr. Mitchell's emotional instability following his wife's death." Jennifer took the folder without reacting. "We'll be presenting medical evidence of Sophie's treatment under her parents' care, as well as testimony from peers and documented evidence of systematic abuse." The courtroom doors opened, and a bailiff called us inside. Judge Catherine Reeves presided, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed the preliminary filings while we took our seats, the silence broken only by the rustling of papers. "This is an emergency hearing regarding temporary custody of Sophie Marie Torres, age 16. Judge Reeves looked up from her papers. "I've read the initial reports from Officer Chen and Child Protective Services. This appears to be a case of disputed parenting methods versus alleged abuse. Let's proceed." Derek's attorney went first, painting a picture of a troubled teenager who'd been caught vandalizing property and lying repeatedly. He presented Sophie as manipulative and rebellious, claiming she'd fabricated stories of abuse to avoid consequences for her actions. Dr. Foster's written evaluation described Sophie as displaying oppositional defiant disorder with narcissistic tendencies. Jennifer countered with Officer Chen's testimony about finding Sophie locked in the garage. She played the recording of Derek admitting to the punishment. She submitted Madison's detailed notes as evidence of a pattern of abuse. She called Mrs. Brennan from CPS, who testified about Sophie's demeanor during the interview and her professional assessment of the home environment. Then Jennifer called Sophie to testify. My granddaughter walked to the witness stand with her head high, her voice steady as she was sworn in. For the next 40 minutes, she recounted her experiences living with Derek. She described the escalating punishments, the control, the isolation. She remained composed even when Derek's attorney tried to rattle her with aggressive questions. "Isn't it true you've been suspended from school twice this year?" the attorney asked. "Yes. Once for skipping class to avoid Derek's business partner after he made inappropriate comments to me. Once for refusing to participate in gym class because Derek had forbidden me from showering at school. He said I could only shower at home where he could monitor my water usage." The attorney's confident expression faltered slightly. "Your stepfather was concerned about water bills?" "My stepfather was concerned about control. Everything in that house is about control." Derek's attorney tried a different approach. "You claim your stepfather locked you in the garage for 9 hours. Yet you never called the police. Never told a teacher. Never sought help. Doesn't that seem suspicious?" Sophie met his eyes without flinching. "He took my phone. He monitors my computer. He reads my emails. The one time I tried to tell my school counselor, Derek called and said I was going through a rebellious phase and making things up for attention. After that, the counselor stopped taking my concerns seriously." Judge Reeves had been taking notes throughout the testimony. She looked up at Sophie with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Miss Torres, what would you like to happen today?" "I want to live with my grandfather. I want to feel safe. I want to go back to being myself instead of constantly walking on eggshells, waiting for the next punishment." "What about your mother? Do you want to maintain contact with her?" Sophie's voice softened. "I love my mom. But she can't protect me from Derek. She won't even try anymore. Until she's ready to leave him, I can't be in that house." The judge turned to Rebecca. "Mrs. Torres, you've been silent through these proceedings. Do you have anything to say?" Rebecca stood slowly, her hands trembling. "Your Honor," Derek's hand shot out and gripped her wrist. She looked down at his fingers wrapped around her arm, then at Sophie sitting in the witness stand, then back at the judge. "I need to tell the truth." Rebecca pulled her arm free from Derek's grasp. "Everything Sophie said is accurate. Derek has been controlling and punitive. I've allowed it to happen because I was scared of losing our home, our lifestyle, everything we built together. But watching my daughter testify, hearing her describe what she's endured, I realize I've already lost everything that matters." Derek's face went crimson. "Rebecca, sit down. You don't know what you're saying." She ignored him, keeping her eyes on the judge. "I want Sophie to stay with my father. I want her to be safe while I figure out how to fix the mess I've made of our lives." The courtroom erupted. Derek's attorney was on his feet objecting. Derek himself stood up, his carefully maintained composure shattering. Jennifer remained seated, letting the chaos unfold without interference. Judge Reeves banged her gavel. "Order. Everyone sit down and be quiet." The room settled slowly. Derek was breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists. Rebecca had tears streaming down her face, but her expression was resolute. Sophie looked at her mother with something like hope dawning in her eyes. Judge Reeves studied the scene before her with the air of someone who'd seen too many broken families to be surprised by anything. "Based on the evidence presented in Mrs. Torres' testimony, I'm granting temporary custody to Harold Mitchell pending further investigation. Sophie will remain in her grandfather's care for a minimum of 60 days while Child Protective Services conducts a full evaluation. Derek and Rebecca Torres will be required to complete parenting classes and submit to psychological evaluation before any custody can be reconsidered. She looked directly at Derek. Mr. Torres, I'm also ordering you to have no contact with Sophie during this period. Any attempt to contact her directly or through third parties will result in immediate legal consequences. Do you understand? Derek stood rigid, his jaw working. This is outrageous. That man poisoned my wife against me. He's turned my daughter into a liar. Your stepdaughter, the judge corrected. And the evidence suggests she's telling the truth. This hearing is adjourned. Walking out of that courtroom felt like emerging from underwater. The relief was physical, a loosening in my chest that had been tight for days. Sophie held my hand as we descended the courthouse steps, her grip strong and steady. Jennifer walked beside us, already discussing the next steps and what the 60-day evaluation period would entail. Rebecca stood alone on the courthouse steps, Derek having stormed off to his car the moment the judge's gavel fell. She looked lost, a woman standing at a crossroads with no map to guide her. Sophie hesitated, then walked over to her mother. "Mom," Sophie said quietly. "You can come stay with us. Grandpa has room." Rebecca's face crumpled. "I can't, honey. I need to figure some things out first." But I meant what I said in there. I'm done letting Derek control our lives. They embraced, both of them crying, and I turned away to give them privacy. Jennifer was on her phone scheduling follow-up appointments and coordinating with CPS. The legal machinery was in motion now, grinding slowly but inexorably toward resolution. The 60 days that followed transformed all of us. Sophie enrolled in Riverside High School and joined the art program. Her drawings slowly shifted from dark, tortured images to brighter compositions full of hope and possibility. She made friends. She laughed again. She stopped flinching when I raised my voice or moved too quickly. Rebecca filed for divorce 3 weeks after the custody hearing. She moved into a small apartment near downtown Portland and started rebuilding her real estate business. The financial records Derek had used to control her turned out to be evidence of his own fraudulent dealings. He'd been running investment schemes using client money, and Rebecca's cooperation with investigators gave prosecutors the evidence they needed. Derek's arrest came on a cold January morning. Securities fraud, wire fraud, and child endangerment charges. His bail was set high enough that even his expensive attorney couldn't get him out. The business empire he'd built on lies and manipulation collapsed within weeks. I watched the news coverage with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because justice was being served. Sadness because it had taken so long for the truth to come out, and because my daughter had wasted years of her life on a man who saw her only as something to control. Sophie's official custody evaluation came back overwhelmingly in my favor. The psychologist noted her dramatic improvement in mental health, her rekindled creativity, and her clear preference for staying with me. The recommendation was for me to retain primary custody with supervised visitation rights for Rebecca once she completed her required therapy. On a Saturday morning in early March, Rebecca came by for coffee. She looked different, lighter somehow, despite the stress of divorce proceedings and financial uncertainty. Sophie was upstairs working on a painting for her school's art show. "Dad," Rebecca said, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "I need to apologize. For everything. For not listening when you tried to warn me about Derek. For choosing him over Sophie's well-being. For letting things get so bad that you had to kick down doors to save your granddaughter. You're apologizing now. That's what matters." She shook her head. "It's not enough. I let him isolate me from you, from my friends, from anyone who might have helped me see what he really was. I convinced myself that his control was love, that his manipulation was just him being protective." She looked up at me with Eleanor's eyes. "How did I become that person? How did I let it happen? Because abusers are good at what they do. They don't start with locking people in garages. They start small. A comment here, a restriction there. They make you doubt yourself until you can't trust your own judgment anymore." Sophie came downstairs carrying a canvas. She'd painted a portrait of Eleanor from an old photograph, capturing her grandmother's warm smile and kind eyes with remarkable skill. "For you, Grandpa. For your birthday." My birthday was still 2 weeks away, but I accepted the painting with tears in my eyes. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. She'd be so proud of you." "Both of you," Sophie said, looking at her mother. "She'd be proud of both of you for fighting for me." Rebecca stayed for lunch, and we talked about safe things. Sophie's art show. Rebecca's new real estate listing. The garden I was planning for spring. Normal family conversation, the kind we hadn't had in years. It felt fragile, like something that might shatter if we pushed too hard, but it was real. Derek's trial was scheduled for summer. His attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but prosecutors wanted to make an example. Financial crimes that hurt ordinary people. Child endangerment. The kind of case that made headlines and ended careers. Sophie testified at a preliminary hearing, her voice steady as she described life under Derek's control. I sat in the gallery watching my granddaughter stand up to the man who'd tried to break her spirit, and felt pride surge through me. She was stronger than Derek had ever been, braver than he could imagine. The judge ordered Derek to undergo psychiatric evaluation. The results painted a picture of narcissistic personality disorder combined with sociopathic tendencies. He saw people as objects to be controlled or discarded based on their usefulness. He felt no genuine remorse, only anger at being caught. 6 months after that rainy November afternoon when I'd found Sophie locked in a garage, she stood on stage at her school's art show. Her paintings lined the gallery walls, a progression from darkness to light that told the story of her recovery without words. The final piece was a large canvas showing a young woman stepping through an open doorway into sunlight, leaving shadows behind. Rebecca and I stood together in the crowd, watching our daughter accept an award for emerging artist. "Eleanor would have been here," Rebecca said quietly. "She would have known what to do from the start." "Maybe. But we figured it out eventually. That's what matters." Sophie found us after the ceremony, her face flushed with excitement and pride. College recruiters were talking to her about art scholarships. Her future was opening up in ways that would have been impossible under Derek's control. That night, the three of us sat on my back porch watching stars appear in the clearing sky. Spring was coming. The garden Eleanor had loved was ready for planting. Sophie had dreams to chase. Rebecca was rebuilding her life on a foundation of truth instead of illusion. And I had my family back, scarred but healing, broken but mending. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Derek's trial would bring everything back to the surface. Rebecca still had years of therapy ahead to undo the damage. Sophie would carry the trauma of those years for the rest of her life. But we were together. We were safe. And we were free. Sometimes justice comes slowly. Sometimes it arrives in a moment of crisis when you kick down a door and refuse to accept abuse as normal. Sometimes it unfolds over months of court hearings and investigations and painful revelations. What I gave Derek and Rebecca when they kicked me out wasn't revenge. It was something more powerful. I gave them the truth they'd been hiding from. I gave Sophie the protection she deserved. I gave Rebecca the chance to remember who she was before manipulation and control rewrote her identity. And in the process, I gave myself a reason to keep going after Eleanor's death. A purpose that extended beyond grief and loneliness into something meaningful and lasting. The price was steep. Legal fees that drained my savings. Sleepless nights worried about outcomes. The pain of watching my daughter struggle with shame and regret. But looking at Sophie's face as she talked about her college plans, seeing the light back in her eyes, I knew it was worth every penny and every moment of fear. Family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about showing up when it matters most. It's about refusing to accept cruelty as discipline. It's about loving people enough to fight for them even when they can't fight for themselves. Eleanor knew that. She taught me that through 40 years of marriage and partnership. And when the moment came to put those lessons into action, I'd found the courage to do what needed to be done. The rain had stopped. Stars filled the sky above Riverside. And in my small house on Maple Street, 3 generations of family sat together, healing and hopeful, ready to face whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.